Through the prison bus window, Steve watched as the world passed by. Tears were streaming down his young, scarred face. He couldn't believe how a 12-year-old boy like him was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. As he sat there, he did a quick flashback on his life and on how cruel the world had been to him. All he ever wanted to be was a nice boy, but life had ruthlessly robbed him of that choice. As his teary eyes watched the trees zoom past the windows, he wished in himself that he could say that he missed the free world, but in reality, prison was a much better place to him than all the freedom the world would care to offer. Ever since he was born, Steve's life was akin to living in hell. They lived in a poor old neighborhood where violence was the norm of the day. His mother, who was an orphan, married Steve's dad when she was only 15 years old. Theirs was not a happy marriage, as Steve's dad was an alcoholic who chose to spend the little money he earned on drugs and alcohol rather than spend it on his young family. Every day when he came home, Steve's dad never hesitated to turn Steve's mom into a punching bag. There is no combination of words in the English vocabulary that best describes the kind of violence that Steve's dad subjected his wife to. It was like he was taking advantage of her desperate, innocent young soul to subject her to the most inhumane treatments. By the time she was turning 16, she looked more of a 40-year-old woman, and not the legendary sweet 16 that girls brag about. And it was when she was 16 that she became pregnant with Steve, but being pregnant didn't prevent Steve's dad from beating her up every day for no apparent reasons. Sometimes, she could go for days without food, but she couldn't dare to go outside to look for some, because her husband had made it a rule that she should never go outside the house. She had to remain indoors at all times, and the fear of what her husband would do to her if he found out that she had tried to sneak out of the house was greater than anything else in her life. Days turned to months, and finally, the day came when Steve was to be born. Steve's dad was out in his usual drinking joints, while his poor wife was battling labor pains all by herself, locked in the house. She was too weak to even call for help, and so she used her remaining energy reserves to birth her son. The closest she had come to seeing a life being brought to the world was when, as a 7-year-old girl, she had witnessed her grandmother's cow calving. And that's all the knowledge she was relying on, and a little prayer to God. Miraculously, all went well, and little Steve was brought to the world. He was extremely underweight, but for now, weight wasn't his mom's main concern. She had no clothes to put him on, and so she took an old baggy jeans trouser that belonged to her husband, laid Steve inside it, and swaddled him with the leg openings. She then gently lifted him and started nursing him. As she looked at her baby suckling her almost dried nipples, she whispered to him, "Son, I'm sorry that I brought you to this cruel world. Sincerely speaking, son, if I was the one doing the choosing, I would have chosen that you be born in a well-up family. Son, right now I know you are underweight, and your health ain't that good, but what's important to me right now is that you are alive. The rest, we shall fight together, son. Someday I know you will become a great person, but as of time, son, only God can tell." Using some old carton boxes, Steve's mom made a makeshift bed on the floor, laid her son in it, and she slept next to him as tears flowed down her cheeks. To her, sleep was more of an escape to misery than a luxury. Rain was heavily falling outside, and so she soothed herself to sleep. She didn't know how long she had slept when she was suddenly woken up with a hot slap from his heavily intoxicated husband.
Lazy woman! What are you doing in bed at this time of the day?
He asked her as he attempted to kick her on her belly. Steve's mom quickly woke up, took her son under her arms, and she replied, "Honey, I just gave birth to your son." The news about Steve's birth didn't sit well with his dad. He didn't celebrate his birth, and to him, Steve was more of a bundle of garbage than a son.
Did I tell you I needed a kid in my house, you good-for-nothing woman? Do you think I need to be someone's dad? Take that filthy puppy of yours out of my house before I toss it out through the window,"
said Steve's dad as he tried to grab Steve. When Steve's motherly instincts wouldn't do as she was told, Steve's dad grabbed her by the leg, dragged her outside in the rain together with her son. He then chained one of her legs to a post and told her,
"Dogs are supposed to spend their night out in the cold. That's where you will spend the night,"
he told her as he shut the door behind him. Poor Steve spent his first day on Earth outside in the rain, but like one destined for greatness, the cold didn't affect him in any way. His mom acted as his shield all night. Despite the cold, her motherly love was enough to keep the young fellow warm. Steve grew up to be a rough boy. Not because he wanted to, but because life itself was his teacher. In his short life, he had been hardened by the hardships, and the only thing that kept him sane and gave him hope in this life was his mother's constant words of encouragement. "Son, I know it doesn't seem like it now, but someday you will be a great person," is what his mom always told him. In school, he had no friends, not because he wasn't social enough, but because no one wanted to be associated with him. Life had been so hard on him such that he had been used to nature treating him so cruelly, till it felt like anything good happening in his life was a setup. His dad seemed to be getting worse each and every day. The two never saw eye to eye, and his dad never hesitated to treat him like a lowly dog when he got the chance. His mom had been bedridden for 2 months because of tuberculosis, but that didn't scare Steve's dad. After all, he used to comfort himself that he could just get another wife if the current one died. So one day, Steve came home from school and he found his drunk dad beating his sick mom. Fuming with rage, Steve took a shower head that was laying around, and he hit his dad so hard on the head, killing him instantly. Steve then proceeded to hit his head repeatedly with a hammer until it was almost pulp. His mom sat on the bed, shaken to the core by what her son had just done. News spread fast of how 12 years old Steve had killed his dad. It didn't take long for the boy to be arrested, taken to court, and the judge harshly sentenced him to life imprisonment. As the prison bus drove past the mountains, Steve thought to himself, "I would rather be in prison than in this cruel world. In prison, I am assured of having a meal every day, and also for the first time in my life, I will sleep on a bed instead of cartons on the floor. I was already living in hell back at home, and so prison won't be a big deal to me." It's ironical how the law was quick to send me to prison, but the same law was so sluggish to come to my aid and that of my mom. After a 7 hours drive, the bus came to a halt in front of the prison gates. From the corners of his eyes, Steve could see some mean-looking prisoners looking at him with all sorts of ill intents towards him. For the first time since the journey started, Steve felt fear creep inside him. His hands started trembling, his heart was beating fast, and intense horror filled his heart when he saw the place that would be his home for the rest of his life. He looked for a way of escape, but there was none. All the prison guards were high on alert and ready to shoot anyone who tried to escape. As the prison guard escorted him to the prison gate, Steve mumbled a little prayer to God and told him, "Please God, don't let me get into this place. Give me another chance, and I promise I will be a good boy. You didn't bring me to this world just to be a prisoner of fate. Please help me out." Just then, Steve heard his mom calling out to him, and then with a gentle pat on his shoulder, she said, Son, wake up. You are gonna be late for school."